So we're going to pick back up with Abram and Sarah. And we finished up 2 weeks ago looking at the covenant that God set in motion with Abram. The book goes on, this lesson kind of goes on as we continue to talk about the blessings. They give it the acronym BLOG. So anytime you hear BLOG or mention BLOG or see BLOG up here on the slide, it means land, offspring, and blessings. It's just what God promised. Okay? Land, offspring, and blessing. It's just kind of their quick acronym for it. They're not always, it's kind of talking about a lot of the blessings that God gives Abraham. So as you see that, that will be popular, kind of know what that is. Land, offspring, and blessings. That's a threefold promise that God, the covenant that He made with Abram. He told him back in the first part of Genesis chapter 12, get up out of Ur, take off, go to Canaan, the land that I've promised you, and I'm going to just richly bless you. I'm not going to be able to number your offspring, and all the stuff, the lesson, or all the promises that He made to Abram. And that's where we finished up last week. Making a great nation, family be blessed. Of course, we know that Messiah comes from the line of Abram as well. The importance of the Jewish people throughout human history, because they are God's chosen people. But it all started way, way, way back with Abraham and Sarah. And the faithfulness that they both demonstrated to God, and more importantly, the faithfulness that God demonstrated to them, even in the midst of some things that weren't really good. As we're going to see today, this is a pretty famous story. We know this one well. This is Abram and Sarah headed down, and the Egyptians showed up, and Abraham being worried that Pharaoh was taking a liking to Sarah, so instead of telling Pharaoh that Sarah's his wife, tells his sister, and we kind of know the repercussions that follow. So that's what today's lesson is kind of about, okay? God's faithfulness in the fall, you could say, if you wanted to kind of put a good word on it. So we see, first of all, before we get into that chapter, verse 10, we continue to see the faithfulness here in verses 4 through 9 that God demonstrates to Abram, okay? And this is a pretty immediate reward for Abram. Right? That happened very quickly. He didn't have to wait long for God to start blessing him with the things that He said He was going to bless him with. A lot of times, and we've experienced this as well, we know God has promised things to us and promised blessing, but sometimes we got to wait on a few things, right? And that's just kind of the way God does stuff. That's not necessarily the case here for Abram. He tells him, I'm going to bless you and reward you for being faithful, and then he starts to do it pretty quickly. As we see here, starting in verse 4. So Abram departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and allotment with him. And Abram was 75 years old, and when he departed of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their stuff that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth, going to the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land, into the place of Sichem, and unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, and having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed going on still southward. So God immediately here demonstrates His faithfulness to Abram by bringing him into the land that He promised him, right? He said, I'm going to promise this land to your seed, but you're also your descendants, but I'm going to show you where it's at. I'm going to show you the land. So we see some immediate faithfulness here to Abraham because of his obedience and finally getting up and go. We noticed a couple weeks ago it took him a while to do that, right? Kind of hem-hawed around a little bit, stopped somewhere else before he kind of really fully decided to go on. Now he's following God, and God's immediately demonstrating some of His faithfulness to him and showing him His promised land. Now, despite the passage again of many years here of Abram's initial failure to obey, God continued to stay faithful to His word and showed Abram the land. Abram found out specifically from God what was the implicit, tangible results of being faithful to Him. God takes him to the land of Canaan and shows him, there it is. This is what I'm going to give you. And so he's able to see that. God was not only taking Abram and showing him the land of Canaan, he was giving it to him, right? He wasn't just saying, here's this land of fruit and honey, as it's called later on. He's giving it to him. He's willing it to Abram, right? So Abram's seeing all this stuff and realizing the importance of being faithful to God. Because the land belongs to God, right? Because definitely he can do whatever he wants to do with it. He can create it. He can give it to whoever he wants to give it to. If God showed up in here and wanted to give Clinchco to Jeff, he could do that. Because God created it, right? That's what he would do. He's in charge of it. I think sometimes, we as people forget, right, who really is in charge of things and who's really the owner of the land that we live on, the land that was given to us. So God, as the Creator, can do whatever he wants to with his creation, and therefore he's giving the land to Abram and to his descendants as the platform, as the area kind of to bless him through the generations and generations that is to come. Now, some of the human impossibilities that God was going to have to do to give this land to Abram, what were they? Human impossibilities. What was God going to have to do to give this land to Abram? What? Give him a son. What else? Yeah, there's people living there. There's people living there, pretty substantial civilizations living there, that Abram and Sarah and Lot and the people that they had on their own, probably not going to go up and be able to fight the Canaanites. So God was going to have to do this to give the land to Abram. So after Abram arrives here at the land, we see in verses 7 and verse 8 as well, that he reciprocates the faithfulness to God by building altars. Okay? So as he's moving down through the land, he stops and he sets up an altar and gives worship and sacrifice to God, reciprocating the faith. So we're seeing the faithfulness between God and Abram here going both ways. Okay? It's a two-way street. God is being faithful to Abram. Abram is being faithful to God by offering sacrifice and showing that he is listening and following after the command of God. And he continues to move down to the south, through the land, to see what it looked like. I'm sure if anything, if you get something new, first thing you want to do is check it out, right? See all the parts of it, want to know what's going on. Abram, he's getting this new piece of land. He's a farmer and a businessman, and he wants to go see what he can do with it. So he's moving down through the land of Canaan and kind of seeing what God is giving him. Okay, so that brings us to verse number 10. So we see the faithfulness, generous faithfulness, and then we see the steadfast faithfulness as well, as God continues to provide for Abram despite some pretty poor decisions. Okay, verse 10. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. Okay, so let's stop right there for just a second. God is showing Abram this land and essentially telling him, this is yours. This is going to be yours and your descendants. And as Abram is moving south through the land, what does he notice? Verse 10 says what's going on. What's it say? Verse 10, what's happening in the land? There's famine. Right? So there's nothing good happening right now in a large portion of this. Okay? So as God is showing Abraham this, Abram is seeing this famine that has happened. What he does, we see in verse 10, is that he heads on down further south into Egypt, because obviously there's not very much food around. The famine is very grievous, very, very severe. Is the actual Hebrew, if you wouldn't look at the true translation of the Hebrew word there for grievous, it means very, very severe. So this is a really, really bad famine. Okay? So he heads down into Egypt. And what do you think is Abram's, what's going through his mind right now as God's showing him this land and there's this huge famine? What would be going through your mind? We kind of see Abram's point here, right? I'm flipping around like, okay, God, you give me this, but ain't nothing here. Food's not growing, people are starving, things aren't good, it's not raining very much. Maybe questioning the true value of what this land actually. Probably thought, is it like this all the time here? Is it always like this? Is people are always struggling to try and get food and stuff here? Probably wonder, is there not a better place that you can give me? Is there not a better place for me to inherit? These are all probably legitimate thoughts, and understandably legitimate thoughts that Abram's having at this time. Okay? As he's seeing this. So what might a person in Abram's situation, what would you be tempted to think about God's faithfulness here? What would you be tempted to think about God's faithfulness? What has God promised Abram? Land, offspring, blessings. Now Abram is walking through this land, and what does he see? Famine, death, and not much good stuff. So what is a common or a very realistic thing that Abram could have been thinking about the faithfulness of God here? That what? God's abilities are what? They're limited, right? He's given me this stuff, but he's not able to control this land, right? He can't even allow to bring forth wheat or barley or something simple. Okay, so he can consider and think maybe God's powers and abilities are limited. Because he cannot keep the land that he's giving Abram to be fruitful. A legitimate point that Abram probably had in his mind at some point. And also by seeing this, first time I walk into something and I'm thinking this is a really nice place and it's not very nice at all. I think, well, I don't know where did I come here, right? We're all do that. It's a very normal response. So the promises that God gave to Abram here were a tremendous blessing. But the promises were valuable only because God had made the promise. Right? Abram's real relationship with God made the promises to be meaningful. When the famine came, the land doesn't look like a great place to live, but knowing that the Lord was near and that he had made Abram all of these unconditional promises, okay, that all these things are going to happen, and that he was in control of creation, that should have given Abram some contentment and some peace, regardless of the famine that's going on around him. Instead, though, what does Abram do? What do we see him do in verse 10? Sees the famine, where does he go? Takes off out of it, right? Heads on down farther, goes straight to Egypt, because he sees not much good going on around him. Okay? So, we see him question his leaving the land that God told him to live in and going to Egypt. We see his faith wavering, right? We see him questioning God. This is why this is here. That's why he leaves. He had no reason to leave, but he leaves because he's questioning God and the faithfulness of God. And he goes so on his own volition, right? He made the decision to go. Now, as he gets closer and closer to Egypt here, if we continue to look in verse 11, and it came to pass, and he was come near to enter into Egypt, and he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they'll kill me. But they will save thee alive. So I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So we see a couple of problems here with the faith of Abram. The first one is him leaving the land of plenty and go on down into Egypt. And now as he's getting close to Egypt, and again, we know this story well, as they get closer and closer, he looks over at Sarah, and he says, Sarah, ain't it so beautiful? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Okay? And she's probably thinking, oh, Abram, thank you. And then he follows up with, you can't be my wife. Not for the next few days. Because he's worried that if Pharaoh or the Egyptians know that Sarah is Abram's wife, that they'll just kill Abram and take Sarah to be Pharaoh's wife, because she's obviously very, very attractive. Okay? So the plan is set into motion, right? Fearing his own safety, he's worried about him dying, worried about him being killed, although God has told him what's God promised him? Son, descendants, right? God has made that promise to him. Does he have a son yet up to this point? No, he doesn't. Okay? But he is fearful here for his own life. Even knowing God has already told him that he's going to give him descendants. We see again more of the mistakes and the missteps here of Abram. So he tells Sarah that he's going to introduce her as his sister instead of his wife, which technically wasn't an entire lie. Sarah, was the daughter of Abraham's father, but by a different mother, so kind of a half-sister type thing. So it wasn't a total lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Okay, and he did this again just to save his own skin. Okay, and he's worried about himself. And just as Abram was afraid of and thought, the Egyptians found Sarah to be very, very beautiful. And his plan worked for a time. Okay, so verse 14, it came to pass that when Abram was coming into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses and men-servants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. So just as Abram had predicted, they do see Sarah. They find her very fair and very attractive, and want to take her back to Pharaoh. So the members of Pharaoh's courts, his princes and people that were around, took Sarah to Pharaoh's house. Now we don't see anything provided here about Abram's thoughts, kind of the details of what happens and to Abram, or what he's kind of thinking about all these events takes place. But it's likely here that Abram was probably not anticipating this level of kind of happening when he told Sarah to act like his sister. He's probably thinking that they would just be able to pass through for whatever the case may be. He probably wasn't expecting to actually take Sarah back. But he does, okay? Verse 17, the Lord plagued Pharaoh in his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? And why saidst thou, she is my sister, so I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore behold thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. Okay, so we see now that Pharaoh gets down there with Sarah, and then these plagues start happening. And bad stuff starts happening to Pharaoh, to his people, to his family, to his kingdom. And Pharaoh's an intelligent man. He figures out, well, everything was good. Sarah shows up. I bring her down here to be my wife, and all this bad stuff starts happening. So he kind of puts two and two together, and I'm sure he asked Sarah at some point, what are you not telling me? And she probably tells him, all this stuff is happening because I'm actually Abram's wife. Okay? So he sends her back to Abram, and kind of scolds him a little bit, wants to know why he didn't tell her, why he didn't tell him, all this kind of stuff that happens. And gave him all the stuff and sent them away just with everything that he had. It was kind of a concern that Abraham didn't tell him that he was his wife. Okay? Now, by looking down through the last part of chapter 12 here, what are some of the ways that God protected and blessed Abram and Sarah, even in the midst of all this deception and unfaithfulness? What are some of the things here that God did to bless them? You look back down through verses 12 down through verse 20. What are some of the things God did to protect and bless them?
He protected them in the land.
He protected them, so he took care of them, right? What else?
He fed them, met their needs.
Met their needs, and not just met their needs. What did Pharaoh do? Pray. What did Pharaoh do there? All kinds of stuff, right? A ton of stuff. Oxen and sheep and donkeys and men servants. He gave them a bunch of stuff. Probably as a wedding, a dowry, a bridal gift for Sarah. And that was probably why he sent it up there. But regardless, he sent him a ton of stuff. And when he found out that the ruse that Abram had played on Pharaoh, did Pharaoh take any of the stuff back? No, he didn't. He let him keep all of it. So Abram was already a pretty wealthy man at this point, just because business and stuff that he did, he just became super, super wealthy. God blessed Abram and Sarah in the middle of their unfaithfulness to him and managed to allow them to have all of this stuff. He gave them material goods. He kept them unharmed here. Pharaoh could have very easily done what to Sarah when she told him that, you know what, I'm actually married to that guy. What could he have done? He probably would have done anybody else. Right? Instantly. And then probably would have found Abraham and then what? Instantly. Anybody else, that's probably what happens. But God takes care and gives provision to Abram and Sarah and remains steadfast to his faithfulness, even in the midst of this huge sinful deception that Abram has come up with. Okay? Has lavish gifts, sheep for wool and meat, donkeys for helping carry stuff, oxen for working the land, camels for transportation, domesticated camels that help use transportation. We think of the wise men using camels and camels being used a lot for transportation. There were a lot of camels during this time, but the domestication of camels during Abram's time was very, very rare. It took somebody with a lot of money, a lot of wealth, power, and people to domesticate camels. As a matter of fact, even now, and just because I was interested in this, I read up, camels are super hard to break, even today. Like the ones that are in the zoos and stuff, they're ornery, very, very ornery animals. And they do not like people trying to get them to do stuff. So the domestication of camels is, it's harder to break a camel than it is a horse. Okay, I don't know, horses are somewhat difficult to break, but camels they're just ornery. All right, and so this would have been the fact that he gave him domesticated camels showed a lot of power, a lot of wealth, and it also shows, what the faithfulness that God continued to show to Abram, regardless of kind of the stuff that is going on. Now, Pharaoh took Abram's wife, Sarah, under a ruse, not understanding who she was. God blesses Abram and Sarah, even in the midst of their unfaithfulness. God also righteously judged Pharaoh because he took another man's wife. Okay? And rebuked him and sent the plagues down, and then he realized where he had gone wrong. Pharaoh in turn then rebuked Abram, and as we see down through verse 20, Pharaoh commanded them concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. Beginning of chapter 13, verse 1, and Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that they had, and Lot with him into the south. Abram doesn't hang around. Pharaoh says, leave, get out of here. You've managed to cause me problems. You managed to get a little bit of my wealth. You need to leave. You don't see any. Abram just quietly shakes his head and goes. He realizes where he has messed up and the problems that he has caused as well. So look at verse 2 of chapter 13 as well. And at the end of this, Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. So in the midst of Abraham's unfaithfulness, we see God steadfastly remaining faithful to him and increasing his wealth substantially. Okay, during this. So the verse 2 finishes up the account of Sarah and Abram and lying to Pharaoh. So look at this and we say, where is Abram at now in the station of his life? Where is he at? He went from in need due to the famine that was going on in the land of Canaan to becoming very, very wealthy, very, very rich. A lot of scholars believe that probably one of the wealthiest people around after this kind of happened. That he was the dude. He was the kind of guy. Everybody knew that. Not just because of what Pharaoh had given him, but he also was a pretty savvy businessman and farmer and all the other stuff too. So he was pretty well off at this point, and again, came directly from the faithfulness that God demonstrated and showed to him. Okay? So Abram greatly blessed here in Egypt, and verse 2 was very rich in cattle. The word very there is the same translation for the word severely that we use with famine. So greatly, so we kind of see that this dude wasn't just wealthy, he was wealthy. He was rich. So that's kind of where God leaves him. That's where he's at right now. Okay? Now, we don't have any response from Abram of this incident, But we can come to the conclusion that Abram probably learned a lesson here, right? Probably learned a very valuable lesson. That, first of all, that God's going to be faithful to him even when he does not deserve to be faithful to. Abraham, he messed up. And God didn't need to bless him in the way that he did. He did rebuke him, and he could have rebuked him and chastised him and taken half of his stuff if he wanted to. It would have been right to do that. God didn't. He remained steadfast. So Abraham learned some lessons here. We start to see some of the maturing of Abraham's faith here. Abraham likely earned all this stuff that he had through the business dealings of the land that they were given to him, and again, God continuing to bless him through all of this. All right, now, Abraham leaves Canaan of his own volition and this concocted plan that he came up with to try to protect himself from Pharaoh. When that plan then blew up in his face, he had to have realized that the lack of his own abilities to fix or even do anything, and how only God's abilities would allow him to face problems, correct things, to fix things, whatever. The next time he has a difficult time in his life, instead of him coming up with a plan, he needs to make sure that he's following through with God's plan. Okay? If we go over to Genesis chapter 26 and look at the first 4 verses, we kind of see some follow-up to this event. So there's plagues that happened to Pharaoh and riches that happened to Abraham, both of which communicated God's faithfulness to Abraham. You go to chapter 26. This is years later now, okay? And there was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee for thee unto thee, and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear to Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of earth be blessed. So years later now, right, God tells Isaac to do what in response to a second famine showing up in Canaan? Don't go where? Don't go to Egypt. He specifically says, right, don't go to Egypt. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt. I know there's a famine. I know it seems like you need help. Where you need help from, do not go to Egypt. Right? So God's message here to Isaac helps us see what he wanted Abram to do. Right? He wanted Abraham to do what during the famine? Stay put. Stay put and allow me to take care of your needs. Stay put. I will make sure you have what you need. I will bless you. He did. So the promises were contingent on his faithfulness. If they doubted the promises or tried to help God keep them, then they were in essence doubting God and questioning his abilities. Hebrews chapter 6, please. And look at verse 13 and 14. Hebrews chapter 6, verses 13 and 14. For when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, Surely blessings I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. So the promises that God gave Abraham were contingent on his faithfulness. Okay? In the end, Abraham trusted God. And became an example of faith for believers of all through the rest of the Scriptures on through the next couple of lessons for us as well. So we see here to finish this up, lesson number 5, being faithful in response to God's faithfulness. Okay, be faithful in response to God's faithfulness. We're going to continue to see this, right? We know these stories of Abraham pretty well. But he becomes a pillar of faithfulness. He becomes one of the people that, all throughout even Testament, they're always referencing back to the faithfulness of Abraham. Next week we look at Abraham separating from Lot, looking down, and then Abraham having to go in and rescue Lot. Lot losing all his stuff, and Abraham realizing again even more so as God being the possessor, of all. So next week we'll look at chapters 13 and 14 of Abraham and continue to see the faithfulness that he has, and faithfulness to God. Okay? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson today. Thank you for the faithfulness that we see, the lack of faithfulness as well from Abraham, and how yet you continue to make sure that even in the midst of him not doing what he was supposed to,